Hi, my name is Gerhard Schwantner and welcome to Selling Power's Daily Report. Today we have the pleasure of continuing our conversation with Dr. Kerry Solkowitz. He's the principal of the Boswell Group. So, how do companies normally react and individuals when they lose a big account?
It can be devastating, as you know. When you have a big account, you're very dependent on them. And the loss of that relationship that you're dependent on can feel like it threatens, depending on how big, it can feel like it threatens the very existence of the company, or at least the jobs of those people who are responsible for that account, for that client.
So how do you deal with that? When you're called into a company and let's say an ad agency lost a big account, they have to lay off 40 people, everybody feels terrible. How do you reconnect them with their potential?
It's a leadership moment when that happens. That's my view anyway, that the leader of the organization has to tell the truth, has to be realistic about the consequences of losing this account. People's jobs may be lost, and if that's the case, it's unfortunate, but it has to happen. But that can also happen in good ways and bad ways. It can happen in ways that are insensitive to those whose jobs are lost, thereby making those who remain feel survivor guilt. They feel terrible about remaining, although of course they feel better about remaining than if they were out on the street. But there's a tremendous anxiety in the organization at a time like that. Everybody feels insecure.
So when a leader calls you and says, Kerry, we need your help.
Well, first of all, I want to understand what actually happened. I want to know about which account was lost and why, and what are the consequences for the organization of that loss. What does that mean for the people? I also want to know how the leader is going to talk to the people about this, and this is where I get involved in counseling them. Certainly telling the truth and being forthright about what really happened is the first step. Being forthright about what the consequences are going to be. The tricky part is in learning from the experience. A lot of times learning is the last thing that people want to do after they've suffered a major blow like that. But I think it's important to learn what went wrong, not for the purposes of casting blame and finding scapegoats, but to try to recoup and to recover from the injury. It feels like an injury when that happens, and to try to prevent that from happening the next time around.
So what are some of the typical misreactions?
Well, finding a scapegoat is probably the most common. There's a difference between constructive self-criticism or constructive organizational criticism, which is really in order, I think, at a time like that, versus destructive blame. And some managers are intuitive about the difference, but some aren't, and some are looking to cast blame so that they can absolve themselves of their own culpability in this loss.
But there's also disappointment in a certain amount of fantasy that's related to the continuity of and the growth of the business.
That's right. That's where some of the anxiety comes from. It's this anxious, destabilizing time. The entire organization sometimes can feel adrift when you lose a big client. And one of the best next steps is to say, you know what, let's learn from this, but let's move on. We have other clients. One of the best ways to deal with the loss of work is to get back to work.
The leader's role is what? You said it's a leadership moment.
The leader's role is to get the people who are there refocused on doing the good work that they know they can do. And by the way, that's another risk factor, is a loss of individual and organizational self-esteem when you lose a big client. It's a natural human tendency that we need to counter, actually, that leaders need to counter, to feeling, oh my God, maybe I'm really not so good after all. I'm not a good salesperson. I'm not a good advertising person. And that's not particularly constructive.
So how do you get past that? That's a narcissistic injury.
The voice of reality is very helpful in the face of a narcissistic injury, because people's fantasies about what they did wrong can predominate over what really happened.
So what you're saying is that there are really two or three issues that are concurrent. One is the business issue. The other one is to appraise reality objectively in the face of that disappointment. And then there's the issue of self-esteem, either as a person or as the organization.
It is complex, and another complicating factor is it all happens fast. We're talking about all these issues that you've just nicely outlined happen essentially right away when you lose the account. It's massive and fast, and the leader has to act quickly. You can't go home and think about this for a week before responding.
Well, thank you, Carrie, for sharing a great deal of insight on another very powerful challenge that leaders face. We're going to continue tomorrow, and we're going to explore the challenges of effective leadership.